The ship groaned like a dying animal as Commander Thyssen Valkyr walked across the damaged bridge, her four legs clicking against metal floors that had once been smooth, but now showed the scars of battle and desperate repairs. And she tried not to think about how many more days her vessel could survive before breaking apart completely in the cold darkness between stars behind her. Through the cracked viewing window, she could see the other ships of her fleet, 47 vessels that carried all that remained of the Volari Third Fleet. Each one held together by emergency welds and prayers, and the desperate hope that they would find somewhere safe before their power cores failed forever. 3 weeks ago, they had been a proud fleet of 200 ships. But then the Dominion had found them at the Catharus Nebula, and now most of those ships existed only as debris floating in the endless void. And most of the people who had served on them existed only as memories in the hearts of the survivors. Commander, called Orathan, her young navigator, his voice shaking as he studied his damaged console. I am detecting radio signals from the third planet of this star. System primitive electromagnetic communications that suggest a species that has not yet discovered faster than light travel. Thyssen turned slowly, her tired eyes focusing on the small blue and green world that hung in the distance like a precious gem against the black curtain of space. And she felt something stir in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time, an uncontacted civilization. She whispered, and the words carried the weight of centuries of galactic law that forbade interference with species that had not yet reached the stars on their own. Her second officer, a scarred veteran named Kellis, stepped forward with concern written across her face. Commander, the laws are clear. We cannot make contact with primitive species, and to do so would be a violation of everything our people have believed for 1,000 generations. Our laws, Thyssen replied slowly, were written by the Galactic Council, and the Galactic Council was destroyed by the Dominion 200 years ago, along with every species that had signed those laws. And I wonder if the dead care very much about what rules we follow. The bridge fell silent as everyone considered her words. And in that silence, they could hear the ship groaning again. Metal stressed beyond its limits, systems failing one by one, life itself slipping away with each passing hour. Thyssen walked to the viewing window and looked out at her broken fleet, at the ships that carried 12,000 wounded soldiers and 20,000 refugees, children and elders and families, who had fled their homeworld just before the Dominion reduced it to burning ash. And she knew that she held all their lives in her hands. How long until our power cores fail completely? She asked, though she already knew the answer. 14 days, Orathan replied, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe less if we continue to run life support at current levels. But we could extend that time if we reduce power to the medical bays. No, Thyssen cut him off. We will not let our wounded die in darkness to buy ourselves a few more days of drifting through space with nowhere to go. She turned back to face her crew, and she saw in their eyes the same exhaustion and fear that she felt in her own heart. But she also saw something else, a flicker of trust, a belief that their commander would find a way to save them even when all hope seemed lost. We will approach the primitive world, she announced, and gasps echoed across the bridge. We will pray that its inhabitants have mercy, and we will ask them for help. Commander, Kellis protested, they are primitives. They cannot possibly have the technology to repair our ships. And even if they wanted to help, what could they offer us? I do not know, Thyssen admitted, but I know that the alternative is death, slow death in the cold dark, as our ships fall apart around us. And I refuse to accept that fate for our people without trying every option that remains. She pressed a button on her command console, and her voice echoed through every ship in the fleet, reaching every soldier and every refugee and every child hiding in converted cargo bays. This is Commander Thyssen Valkyr, she said. We have detected a populated world in this system, a primitive species that has not yet reached the stars. And I have made the decision to approach them and ask for assistance. Knowing that this violates the old laws, knowing that we have no guarantee they will help us, but knowing also that we have no other choice. She paused and took a deep breath before continuing. The Dominion has taken everything from us. Our homes, our families, our fleet, our hope, but they have not taken our will to survive. And as long as one Valari heart still beats, we will keep fighting to live. And so we will go to this strange world, and we will trust in the kindness of strangers, because that is all we have left. When she ended the transmission, she expected protests or arguments or fear. But instead she heard something that brought tears to her tired eyes, a sound that spread from ship to ship across her broken fleet. They were singing. It was an old Valari song, a hymn of hope that parents sang to their children during long nights. And as the voices rose through the damaged corridors and echoed across the void between ships, Thiessen felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Set a course for the third planet," she ordered. And her voice was steady, even as tears rolled down her face. "And may whatever God still watch over us grant that these strange beings have mercy in their hearts." The fleet turned slowly toward the small blue world, engines struggling and hulls groaning, but still moving forward, still refusing to die, still hoping against all reason that salvation waited for them on a planet whose inhabitants did not even know that life existed beyond their own sky. Thiessen stood at the window and watched the planet grow larger, and she wondered what kind of beings lived there, wondered if they would greet her people with weapons or with welcome, wondered if she had just doomed her entire species by breaking the oldest law in the galaxy. But she also wondered, and this thought surprised her most of all, whether perhaps the old laws had been wrong, whether perhaps the galaxy had been too afraid for too long, whether perhaps a universe that forbade asking strangers for help was a universe that deserved to fall to the Dominion, whatever waited for them on that blue world. They would face it together, and that was enough. It had to be enough. The humans detected them long before they reached the planet, and Thiessen had expected panic or fear or perhaps primitive weapons fired blindly into the sky. But what she received instead made her freeze at her command console with her mouth hanging open, in disbelief. Within 6 hours of entering the system, organized transmissions began reaching the fleet, not random noise, not confused shouting, but structured mathematical sequences followed by linguistic patterns that can only be one thing. "They are trying to communicate with us," Orthan said, his voice filled with wonder as he studied the incoming signals. "They are sending us mathematical proofs as a foundation for language. And they are doing it faster than any species I have ever seen, Commander. They figured out basic translation protocols in less than 1 day." Thiessen leaned forward in her chair, her exhaustion forgotten as she watched the data stream across her screen. And she felt a strange chill run down her spine. Because this was not how first contact was supposed to work. Primitive species were supposed to panic. They were supposed to hide or attack or pray to their gods for protection. But these humans were doing none of those things. And instead they were reaching out with curiosity and something that looked almost like eagerness by the time the Whisper of Dawn achieved orbit around the blue planet. The humans had constructed a rudimentary translation program that allowed basic communication. And Thiessen found herself staring at her console as the first clear message came through. "Unknown vessels," the message said, the words crackling with static but perfectly understandable. "This is United Nations Emergency Contact, speaking for the people of Earth. Do you require assistance?" Thiessen read the message 3 times because she could not believe what she was seeing. And then she turned to look at her crew with tears forming in her eyes. "They asked if we need help," she whispered. Their first question, before asking who we are, or what we want, or why we are here, Their first question is whether we need help. Kella shook her head slowly, her scarred face showing an emotion that might have been hope. No species does that. Commander, no species offers help before knowing if we are a threat. Perhaps, Thiessen replied as she began preparing a response. We have simply never met a species like this before. The landing party touched down in the place the humans called Geneva, and Thiessen stepped out of her shuttle, expecting soldiers or weapons or at least some show of defensive force. But what she found instead stole her breath away. Thousands of humans had gathered in the open space. And they had not brought weapons. They had brought medicine and food and blankets and equipment that looked like portable shelters. And at the front of the crowd stood people wearing white clothing with symbols that Thiessen would later learn marked them as healers. A human female with gray hair and warm eyes stepped forward without hesitation, walking right up to Thiessen as if meeting an alien species was something she did every day. And she spoke through a small translation device that hung around her neck. I am Dr. Elena Vasquez, she said, and I lead the World Health Organization. Please tell me, how many wounded do you have? Thiessen stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what was happening. Because in all her years of military service, she had never encountered anything like this moment. 12,000, she finally answered. We have 12,000 wounded across our fleet. But your technology, you cannot possibly. Dr. Vasquez was already speaking into a communication device before Thiessen could finish, barking orders in a language the translator could not quite catch. And around her, the crowd began to move with purpose and efficiency. We are mobilizing every hospital on 6 continents, Dr. Vasquez said calmly. And we will need transport coordinates for evacuation ships. Can your wounded survive atmospheric entry? Or do we need to send our doctors to you? Thiessen felt her legs grow weak, and she might have fallen if Arthen had not caught her arm. Because this was impossible. This was completely and utterly impossible. And yet it was happening right in front of her eyes over the next several hours. Thiessen met more humans than she could count, and each one asked the same kinds of questions, not about weapons or defense, or whether the Volari posed a threat, but about what was needed, what was broken, what could be fixed. A tall human male with dark skin and kind eyes introduced himself as Secretary General Marcus Okonkwo, and he sat across from Thiessen in a simple room and listened as she told the story of her people. She told him about the Dominion, the ancient enemy that had conquered the galaxy for 3,000 years, that destroyed entire civilizations without mercy, that could not be stopped or reasoned with or escaped. And she watched his face as she described the fall of her homeworld and the desperate flight that had brought her people to his doorstep. When she finished, Secretary General Okonkwo was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was heavy with an emotion she did not expect. I am sorry, he said. I am so sorry for what you have lost, and I promise you that Earth will do everything in its power to help you. You do not understand, Thiessen replied. The Dominion will come for you too now. By helping us, you have marked yourselves as enemies, and they will not stop until your world burns as ours did. The Secretary General leaned forward and met her eyes with a steady gaze that held no fear. Then we will face them together, he said simply. Because that is what humans do. We help those who need help, and we fight for those who cannot fight alone. And we do not abandon our friends even when the enemy is stronger than we are. Thiessen looked at this strange being from a primitive world. This creature, whose species had not even left their own planet yet. And she saw something in his eyes that she had not seen in any galactic leader for a very long time. She saw courage that did not flinch. She saw compassion that did not calculate. She saw a kind of fierce and stubborn hope that refused to die no matter how dark the night became. Why? She asked, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. Why would you risk everything for strangers you just met? Secretary General Okonkwo smiled, And his smile carried the weight of all human history, all the wars they had fought against each other, all the times they had failed, and all the times they had chosen to be better. Because, he said, we know what it feels like to need help and have no one come. And we decided long ago that we would never let anyone else feel that way if we could do something about it. Thiessen lowered her head as tears fell from her eyes. And for the first time since the Dominion had destroyed her world, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be hope after all. What happened next was unlike anything in the long history of the Volari people, and Commander Thiessen found herself watching in stunned silence as the entire planet mobilized to save strangers from the stars. Factories that had once made vehicles called cars switched their production lines overnight and began producing hull plating based on Volari, designs that human engineers had studied for less than 3 days. And when Thiessen asked how this was possible, a human worker just shrugged and said they had dealt with harder deadlines before. Shipyards around the world that had built vessels for human oceans were suddenly working on starships, and human welders stood shoulder to shoulder with Volari engineers, communicating through gesture and translation, devices and the universal language of pointing at things and nodding. Companies that made things called airplanes took apart Volari propulsion systems and analyzed every component. And within a single week, they had submitted proposals for improvements that made Volari scientists stare at their screens in disbelief, because these primitives had found solutions that the galactic community had missed for centuries. This is impossible, muttered Chief Engineer Vorhan as he reviewed the human modifications to the fleet's reactor cores. They have increased power output by 40% while reducing fuel consumption by 1/3. We spent 200 years developing this technology, and they improved it in 6 days. Thiessen stood beside him and watched as human workers swarmed over the whisper of dawn like insects, replacing damaged panels and upgrading systems with a speed that bordered on madness. How do they work so fast? She asked a human supervisor named James, who was drinking his 5th cup of something called coffee that morning. James laughed and wiped sweat from his forehead. We have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention, and right now the necessity is keeping your people alive. So we will invent whatever we need to invent. But it was not just the technology that amazed Thiessen, it was the spirit behind it. She watched human doctors working through the night to save Volari lives, learning alien biology in hours instead of years, adapting their medicines and their techniques with a creativity that seemed almost supernatural. She watched human children visit Volari children in refugee camps, bringing toys and games and laughter that crossed the barrier between species as easily as sunlight crosses the void. She watched human families open their homes to Volari refugees, sharing meals and stories and warmth with creatures that looked nothing like them and came from a world they could not even imagine. Young Orathan had been assigned to work with human programmers on navigation systems, and he came to Thiessen one evening with an expression of complete bewilderment on his face. "Commander, I do not understand these beings," he said, his voice filled with something between frustration and wonder. "They consume a bitter drink that makes them unable to sleep. And then they work for 3 days straight, arguing with each other about the best way to improve our systems. That sounds terrible." Thiessen replied, "No." Arthan shook his head. "That is the strange part. They enjoy it. They laugh at their failures and celebrate each other's successes. And when they finally solve a problem, they embrace each other like family, even though they just met." He paused and his voice grew soft. "I asked one of them, a young woman named Priya, why they work so hard for us. And she looked at me like I had asked the strangest question she had ever heard." "What did she say?" Thiessen asked. "She said, because you needed help," and then she went back to work as if that was all the explanation. Anyone could ever need. Thiessen felt something tighten in her chest, and she thought about all the species she had encountered in her life, all the civilizations that had watched each other fall to the Dominion without lifting a finger to help, all the empires that had calculated the cost of intervention and decided it was too high, and here were these primitives, these creatures who had never left their own world, who knew nothing of galactic politics or ancient enemies, and they were giving everything they had to save strangers, simply because those strangers needed saving. The weeks passed and the fleet transformed before Thiessen's eyes. Ships that had been held together by emergency welds now gleamed with new hull plating, stronger than anything the Valari had ever built. And engines that had been failing now hummed with power that exceeded their original specifications by orders of magnitude. But the humans did not stop at repairs. They added new systems, medical bays with human and Valari equipment working together, food production units that could feed twice as many refugees, communication arrays that could reach across entire star systems, and 1,000 other improvements that turned the broken refugee fleet into something that resembled hope. And through it all, the humans kept asking the same question: what else do you need? One evening, Thiessen stood on a hill overlooking a human city and watched the sun set behind mountains that reminded her of her lost homeworld. And Dr. Vasquez came to stand beside her. "Your people are strange," Thiessen said quietly. "You have such capacity for destruction. Your history is filled with wars against yourselves, and yet you show us such kindness." Dr. Vasquez was silent for a moment before she replied. "Maybe that is exactly why," she said. "We know what cruelty looks like because we have been cruel to each other. And we know what kindness costs because we have often failed to pay that price. So when we have the chance to choose, we try to choose better." She turned to face Thiessen with eyes that held both sadness and determination. "We cannot undo the harm our species has done to itself over the centuries. But we can decide what we want to be now, and we want to be the kind of people who help when help is needed." Thiessen looked at this human woman who had worked tirelessly to save Valari lives, and she felt something shift in her understanding of the universe. Perhaps strength was not measured in weapons or warships. Perhaps strength was measured in the choice to help even when helping was hard. Perhaps these primitives, these strange and wonderful and terrifying creatures, understood something about the universe that the galaxy had forgotten long ago. "The Dominion will come," Thiessen said. "And when they learn what you have done, they will try to destroy you." Dr. Vasquez smiled, and her smile held no fear. "Then we had better make sure you are ready to fight," she said, "because we are going to need all the friends we can get." The meeting took place in a bunker deep beneath a mountain, and General Marcus Chun sat across from Commander Thiessen, with a tablet in his hands and a look on his face that she had not seen on any human before, something cold and calculating that reminded her of the warriors she had known in her own fleet. "We have studied the Dominion," General Chun said, his voice flat and professional. "We have analyzed every piece of data you gave us, their weapons, their tactics, their history, and we have a proposal." He slid the tablet across the table, and Thiessen picked it up with hands that trembled slightly because she could already guess what it would contain. The screen showed weapons, not the crude devices she had expected from a primitive world, but sophisticated systems that combined human engineering with Valari power sources in ways that made her blood run cold. "You want to arm us," she said. "We want to arm ourselves too." General Chun replied without hesitation. "The Dominion will reach Earth eventually, whether we help you or not. They have been conquering the galaxy for 3,000 years, and they will not stop until every world burns. So we might as well fight them now. Together, rather than waiting for them to arrive at our doorstep. Thiessen studied the schematics on the tablet and felt a chill spread through her body as she understood what she was seeing: kinetic bombardment systems that could accelerate metal projectiles to speeds that would punch through Dominion armor like paper. Designed by humans who had spent centuries developing ways to kill each other from orbit electronic warfare suites that could confuse and blind enemy sensors. Created by a species that had been fighting information wars against itself since before they left their own atmosphere drone. Swarms that could overwhelm point defense systems through sheer numbers. Inspired by something the humans called insect behavior and refined through decades of robotic warfare research. You are warriors, Thiessen said slowly. I knew your species had fought wars, but I did not understand you are very good at killing. We have had a lot of practice, General Chun admitted without pride or shame. We have spent most of our history fighting each other, and we have gotten very efficient at destruction. But we have also learned that weapons are only tools, and what matters is the purpose behind them. He leaned forward and his cold expression softened just slightly. The purpose behind these weapons is to protect your people and ours, to give the Dominion something they have never faced before, to show them that the galaxy will not lie down and die just because they say so. Thiessen looked at the schematics again, and this time she noticed something that made her stop breathing for a moment. The weapons were terrifying. Yes, but they were not the only modifications the humans had planned. The design showed armored sections around the refugee quarters, reinforced bulkheads around the medical base, emergency escape pods designed specifically for children, and a dozen other defensive systems that had nothing to do with killing and everything to do with survival. You are protecting them, she whispered. You are not just arming our ships. You are protecting the people inside them. General Chun nodded slowly. A weapon is only useful if you have something worth defending, and from what I have seen, your people are very much worth defending. In the weeks that followed, Thiessen watched as the humans transformed. Our fleet once again engineers who had designed weapons capable of destroying cities worked side by side with doctors who wanted to make sure the weapons would never be turned against civilians. And the result was something that should not have been possible. A war machine built with mercy at its heart. The human ships were crewed by galactic standards, their designs based on technology that was centuries behind what the Dominion possessed. But what they lacked in elegance, they made up for in something Thiessen could only call stubbornness. Human vessels were designed to take damage that would destroy any other ship and keep fighting. Built with redundant systems and backup systems for the backups. Crewed by soldiers who had grown up learning that retreat was sometimes necessary, but surrender was never an option. Northen came to Thiessen one evening with a look of wonder mixed with terror on his young face. I have been studying human military history, he said. And Commander, I am frightened of the humans? Thiessen asked. Of what they might do to the Dominion, Orthen replied. There is a human concept called total war. They do not fight like other species. When humans go to war, they commit everything they have, and they do not stop until the enemy is completely destroyed or they are. He shook his head. Slowly, the Dominion has never faced anything like this. They have always conquered through fear and overwhelming force, but humans do not seem to understand fear the way other species do. They feel it, yes, but they fight through it anyway. Thiessen thought about this for a long time, and she remembered the look in General Chun's eyes during their meeting. That cold calculation mixed with something fierce and unyielding. She also remembered Dr. Vasquez's kindness and Priya's simple explanation, and the children playing together in parks while their parents worked to save strangers from the stars. Perhaps, she said finally, That is exactly what the galaxy needs, a species that knows both how to destroy and how to love, and knows when each is appropriate. 3 months after the Valari arrived at Earth, the fleet launched from orbit 47 Valari ships, rebuilt and transformed into something new, armed with weapons that would make the Dominion pause for the first time in 3,000 years, and beside them flew 12 human vessels, crewed by soldiers who had never seen the stars before, but who had volunteered anyway because somewhere out there, innocent people were dying, and someone had to do something about it. Commander Thiessen stood on the bridge of the Whisper of Dawn and looked out at the combined fleet, and she felt tears rolling down her face as she transmitted a message to all ships. "Today we go to war," she said. "But we do not go alone. Earth stands with us. And together we will show the Dominion that the galaxy still has hope behind her." She heard the human crew members cheering, and the sound mixed with the singing of Valari refugees, until it became something new, a sound that had never existed before in all the history of the universe. It was the sound of two species becoming one family. It was the sound of a war about to change forever. The Dominion's 7th Conquest Fleet arrived at the Valari colony of Thismer, expecting the same easy victory they had enjoyed for 3,000 years. And Admiral Zixkull stood on his command bridge with the confident smile of a predator who had never known defeat. His fleet numbered 200 warships, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a planet to ash. And before him lay a single colony world defended by the pathetic remnants of a beaten enemy, or so his intelligence reports claimed. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered, his voice carrying the boredom of someone who had destroyed 100 worlds before this one. "There is no need for complex tactics against prey this week." His weapons officers prepared to fire, but before they could, warning alarms began screaming across every console on the bridge. "Admiral," shouted his sensor officer, "unknown contacts emerging from behind the planet's moon 47. Valari vessels and 12 ships of unknown design." Zixkull laughed because 47 damaged refugee ships and 12 mystery vessels could not possibly threaten a fleet of 200 Dominion warships. But his laughter died in his throat as the tactical data appeared on his screen. The Valari ships were not damaged anymore. They were fully repaired and upgraded and moving with a speed that should have been impossible, and the unknown vessels were broadcasting a transmission on all frequencies. "Dominion fleet," said a voice in a language Zixkull had never heard before. "This is Captain Sarah Mitchell of the Earth Defense Force. You have exactly one chance to withdraw from this system before we remove you by force. Choose wisely." For a long moment, Admiral Zixkull stared at his screen in confusion because no species had ever spoken to the Dominion this way. No species had ever dared to threaten a conquest fleet, and he did not understand what he was seeing. "Destroy them," he ordered, his voice carrying a tremor that had never been there before. Destroy them all. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. The Dominion fleet advanced in their standard formation, overwhelming force concentrated against a single point, because this tactic had worked for 3,000 years, and there was no reason to change it. But the humans did not fight like any species the Dominion had faced. The 4 Captain Mitchell's ships did not retreat when faced with superior numbers, and they did not try to match the Dominion's tactics. Instead, they scattered and reformed and scattered again, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the Dominion could respond. Kinetic projectiles slammed into Dominion hulls at speeds that overwhelmed their shields, tearing through armor that had been considered invincible. Electronic warfare systems blinded Dominion sensors, making it impossible to track the fast-moving human vessels. Drone swarms poured from human ships in clouds so thick that they blocked out the stars, each tiny machine carrying just enough explosive to damage a critical system, and through it all, the Volari fleet fought with a ferocity they had never shown before, not the desperation of the doomed, but the fierce determination of people who finally had something to fight for. Commander Thiessen led her ships into the heart of the Dominion formation, and she watched as vessels that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia began to explode around her. "They are breaking formation!" shouted Orathan, his voice filled with disbelief. "Commander, the Dominion is retreating." Thiessen stared at her screen and saw something that no one had seen in 3,000 years. Dominion warships turning to flee, their confident formation shattered, their legendary discipline crumbling in the face of an enemy they could not understand. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, the Dominion's 7th Conquest Fleet had been reduced to 43 ships fleeing into hyperspace as fast as they're damaged. Engines could carry them. Admiral Zixkull was not. Among the survivors, Commander Thiessen sat in the silence of her bridge and stared at the tactical display, at the debris of Dominion warships floating where a proud fleet had been just hours before. And she could not quite believe what she was seeing. "We won," she whispered, and the words felt strange in her mouth, because she had not allowed herself to imagine victory in so very long. Captain Mitchell's face appeared on her screen, and the human woman was grinning with a fierce joy that made her look almost feral. "Nice work, Commander," she said. "But this is just the beginning. We need to let the galaxy know what happened here." Thiessen nodded slowly and opened a communication channel that would broadcast across every frequency the Volari knew, reaching worlds and stations and ships throughout the conquered territories of what had once been free space. "This is Commander Thiessen Valkyr of the Volari 3rd Fleet," she said, "and I am transmitting from the Thiesmer system, where the Dominion's 7th Conquest Fleet has just been defeated in battle." She paused and took a deep breath before continuing. "The Volari have allies now, a species called humans from a world called Earth, and we are no longer running any world that seeks refuge from the Dominion. Any species that wishes to fight back will find friends here." She looked at the debris field one more time and then back at the camera. "The Dominion has told you that resistance is impossible. They have lied today. We proved that they can be beaten, and tomorrow we will prove it again. The war is not over. But for the first time in 3,000 years, there is hope." The message went out across the stars, and the effect was immediate. Species that had been conquered for centuries began to whisper of rebellion, passing the recording from world to world like a secret flame that could not be extinguished. Neutral civilizations that had stayed hidden sent cautious messages offering supplies and intelligence and support. Refugees flooded toward Earth from every direction, and the humans welcomed them all, put them to work, learned from them, taught them, and added their strength to the growing coalition. Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the Dominion Empire, they would mark humanity's first contact as the turning point, the moment when everything began to change. But Commander Thiessen knew the truth, and she shared it with Dr. Vasquez on a quiet evening after the victory celebrations had ended. "It was not your weapons that changed the war," she said. "It was not your tactics or your technology or your terrible efficiency at destruction." Dr. Vasquez looked at her with curious eyes. "What was it then?" Thiessen smiled, a real smile, the first one she had worn since her homeworld burned. "It was a question," she said. "A single question that you asked when we first arrived at your world. Do you require assistance?" She looked up at the stars that now held hope instead of fear. The Dominion ruled through terror. They made everyone believe that no one would help, that every species was alone, that there was no point in fighting back, and then you came along and shattered that belief simply by offering kindness to strangers. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment before she replied, "Maybe that is what the galaxy needed all along," she said. "Not a weapon to defeat the Dominion, but a reminder that kindness still exists, that hope still exists, that we are never as alone as our enemies want us to believe. Thiessen nodded and watched the stars. And somewhere among them, she knew, the Dominion was preparing for a war unlike any they had fought before. But she also knew that Earth was preparing too. And the shipyards were full, and new allies arrived every day. And a generation of children, human and Valari and a dozen other species, were growing up together as one family. The war would be long, and it would be hard, and many would fall before it ended. But for the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy had something to fight for, and that made all the difference.